To start, we have the Speedy Crawler, perfect for aggressive play in flanks and able to dodge slow-moving missiles. They can be teched to be even faster, harder to kill, or replicate when killing enemy units. Double-teching crawlers in a single round can be a great way to cheese around, especially with the crawler drop card. But relying too heavily on crawlers in the long term isn't too viable due to how hard they are countered by splash damage like fire. Also, they can't hit air units. Crawlers are primarily used as chaff. Remember that chaff units are units whose primary purpose is to die for the good cause of distracting powerful enemy attacks from landing on your more valuable units. The other primary chaff, fangs, can hit air. They are better for defensive play and too slow to dodge missiles. But slow is an advantage when you need late arriving chaff. One of the rightly most expensive techs in the game is Fang's Shield, which can soak one instance of damage no matter how high, making them exponentially better at delaying burst chaff clear, which is why rapidly firing units like Mustangs are better against Fangs. Fangs also introduced the concept that even chaff can be a carry unit if teched with range and damage, particularly when paired with barriers to protect them from fire. Finally, even a single pack of Fangs can sometimes be enough to save you from a default loss to a cheesy airplay. Speaking of cheesy airplays, the air chaff, Wasps, is great for that with their jump drive tech. Shield can make them better chaff, aerial specialization makes them some of the best anti-air in the game, and other techs like range or elite marksman can make them one of the strongest carry units in the game. Because of this terrifying potential, you should always take Wasps seriously. The best counter can depend on what techs the Wasp has. Mustangs if the Wasps are improved with explosive ammo, Wraith if they don't have anti-air, or Fortress with anti-air if they don't have shield and too many levels or other units to counteract this technology. Farseers are always a great counter. A parallel concept to chaff is chaff clear, units which are good at killing chaff. Hounds toe the line by being both chaff and chaff clear, though doing neither role particularly well when unteched. Hounds can both create fire and clean it up, can carry in the right situation with the right techs just like Fangs, but will be vulnerable to units like the Scorpion or Raiden. Another good counter to the Hound can be charged shot arc lights. Arc lights are a more common and reliable form of chaff clear, better versus crawlers because Fangs have the threat of shield. With powerful techs like Elite and EMP, arc lights with experience can scale into carry units capable of killing anything, especially if you get the smart arc light card. To stop this, don't feed them XP with crawlers, go into tanky units early before they gain enough techs and levels to kill them, or bait them into getting other technologies like anti-air or charge shot, but then switch into units that those techs aren't good against. For an example, with charge shot, arc lights are doing a lot of overkill versus chaff. Speaking of overkill versus chaff, steel balls lock onto a unit and the damage scales up exponentially and drops when it switches to a new target. This means their potential is wasted versus chaff, but is excellent versus high health ground units or reinforced towers. This weakness means pairing steel balls with good chaff clear like Mustangs or Wraiths is a must, but their speed and excellence versus towers makes them ideal for aggro play. Some techs make them excel at their role, while Mechanical Division allows them to generate late arriving chaff. To defeat them, when in doubt, remember that they can't attack air. Speaking of air, the Wraith is a unit that works quite opposite from Steel Ball's singular focus, and avoids the overkill issue of arc lights with charged shot. Each of the Wraith's guns fires at targets independently, preventing them from getting stuck on a singular target. Their short range and vulnerability to anti-air means they can't be relied on as a carry unit long term, but they can be exceptional for cheese plays to solo an entire army if the opponent doesn't have powerful single target anti-air. High level from a unit drop with an item or some of their tanky techs, Wraiths can turn into a hero unit that can't be killed by anything short of a melting point or charged shot EMP Phoenix. Like the Wraith, Mustangs don't overkill, but they get stuck on anything with armor, as armor takes a set amount of damage off of every projectile, punishing fast attacking units like the Mustang. Mustangs have some of the highest damage, best anti-air, and best anti-missile of any unit in the game. However, without barriers or hounds to protect them, they will melt to fire in addition to their weakness versus armor. Speaking of armor, sledgehammers have armor, and break are neat categorization of units into chaff or anti-chaff, being more of a general purpose unit of medium size. Some people will use their damage boosting, range, and EMP techs to make them carry DPS. Others will use their health boosting techs to make them super tanky. And in some contexts, they can even act as sort of a super chaff, with just the armor tech for the durability. Their medium size makes them vulnerable to anti-medium units like Scorpions, which destroy units like the Sledgehammer and Steel Ball. Scorpions can also be teched to be very tanky, or with double shot and acid, can become giant killers. Although they grossly overkill versus chaff, to new players it can sometimes feel like the Scorpion destroys everything on the ground. Luckily, they can't hit air, which makes them vulnerable to air units like the Overlord or Phoenix, the air sniper. Phoenix's incredible single target damage can be increased with a variety of techs, making them incredibly punishing to a player with insufficient chaff and anti-air. They have some fun techs like jump drive and quantum reassembly, which allows them to resurrect once if another Phoenix is still alive. With range tech, they are also one of the longest range units in the game. But that range doesn't help versus cloaked Phantom Rays, which can't be targeted until they are nearby. Phantom Rays are vulnerable to missile interception until you tech their giant killing burst mode. Aside from their unique cloak burst and oil techs, the Phantom Ray is kind of like the air sledge, with tanky technologies and the added benefit of being out of reach of Scorpions. They are still vulnerable to the air equivalent of the Scorpion, the Raiden, which is excellent at taking down medium-sized units like the Sledgehammer and Phantom Ray. With the right techs, the Raiden can become either better at chaff or a giant killer, with the always powerful range and EMP techs. Raidens are pretty vulnerable to any unit with a dedicated anti-air tech. Speaking of units with anti-air techs, the Marksman is a great place to start. They have many versatile techs, allowing them to be used for anti-air, anti-big units, or even the unique assault mode, which makes them tanky with splash damage. However, they are deployment inefficient, so you need a lot of them to carry, and especially unteched and unleveled, they aren't as good at taking down giant units as something like the Melting Point. For an example, they can't dish out damage fast enough to stop a Rhino before it snipes your tower. Rhinos are a kind of niche unit that can be hard to use for anything but a cheesy beacon tower snipe. They have a lot of interesting technologies, but they are so easily countered by units like the Melting Point that it's risky to commit heavily to them. For an example, it's all fun and games to run Final Blitz Rhinos, until the opponent's hacker takes control of them and sends them right back to explode on you. The hacker is another niche unit that can be extremely powerful in the right situation, but is useless in others. For an example, it only deals a third of its damage to unhackable targets like barriers or towers. The hacker is really weak to chaff, but if it levels, it can start to control everything and snowball the tide of a battle. Chaff and air units will put an end to hackers, but they can still be useful for their barrier tech, especially when paired with a chaff clearing unit that needs a barrier, like Mustangs. Speaking of barriers, the Fortress has a barrier tech also, making it great to pair with Fangs, which it can also generate with another technology. Another common fort tech is Anti-Air Barrage, one of the strongest counters to the Wasp, a decent way to deal with Phoenix, and provides some damage versus all other air units also. Rocket Punch and other technologies scale up the amount of damage the Fortress can do, but they can always be taken down with units that excel in single target damage. What's the counter to these units with barriers? One option is Stormcallers. While half their rockets miss smaller targets, they'll all hit a barrier. Stormcallers can dish out more damage than anything in the game, but have stark weaknesses like not being able to fire at ground units that get too close to them, or not being able to fire at air units, and they're weak to all forms of missile interception. But they excel at big or slow-moving ground targets and can be deadly if you don't take them seriously. Perhaps a more reliable barrier counter is the Melting Point. Not only does it melt barriers, but its EMP barrage will also destroy them, as well as disabling techs. The Melter can be a must-have for dealing with any high-health unit, particularly if they have an item, tech, or level advantage that makes them unkillable for your other anti-giant options. But nothing is unkillable for the Melting Point, whose only weakness is chaff and the fact that it itself is also a big target and susceptible to its smaller counterpoint, Steel Ball. Although the Melting Point is a great choice for killing giants, it can need some help versus the Sandworm, which will burrow and sneak up on it if you don't drip feed chaff to keep the Sandworm unburrowed. Techs like Sandstorm and Replicate can also make the Melter have more trouble. A leveled and teched Sandworm can seem overpowered to a new player, but there are some tanky heavy hitters that can deal with it, like the War Factory, Fortress, or the Overlord, a giant flyer that can generate chaff, demolish ground units with its air cannon, and protect allies with its photon emission. The ground cannon and jump drive can make for some cheesy tower snipe plays, but the Overlord will die to anti-air technologies, the mighty Melting Point, and even have its attacks disabled by anti-missile. Speaking of anti-missile and units that are destroyed by melting points, the War Factory has some of the best anti-missile in the game. Recruiting an armored level 2 War Factory can be a great way to end long games in a single turn, if the opponent doesn't already have melding
This
points
guy
or
over
some other
here,
excellent giant killer
uses
on their
lots.
board. For something that's worse at anti-missile than a factory and worse at killing giant units than a melting point, look no further than the Sabertooth. Although other units can do its job better, its lower cost and position as a starting unit gives it a niche of its own. A high-level Sabertooth drop can become a tanky, unkillable hero until it's countered and you sell it for cash. Like all tank killers, the Sabertooth will waste its firepower on chaff if not supported by chaff clear, like the Tarantula, which can be beefy like the Sabertooth but with a completely different role. If it gains levels, this spider can scale into one of the deadliest units in the game, with some powerful techs, including the unique ability to spawn explosive spider mines which also double as chaff, forcing the opponent to build their own chaff clear in order to defeat these beefy chaff clearing spiders. Speaking of beefy chaff clear, the Vulcan is the ultimate tanky ground chaff destroyer. Known for the play dubbed as war crimes when you tech both fire and oil bombs, turning the battlefield into a nightmare, Vulcans can also deal with medium units like the Sledgehammer with its Scorch technology, or summon marksmen to help it deal with its own weaknesses. Vulcans, like all beefy units, are vulnerable to the melting point or other giant killers, especially if they are in the air where the Vulcan can't fire back. Speaking of fire, barriers can prevent the war crimes from landing. Fire Badgers are like baby Vulcans. Despite being smaller, they can be just as tanky, but are more vulnerable to units that kill medium-sized targets like the Scorpion or Raiden. Fire Badgers are a special unit, meaning that you can't unlock them unless you get them from a unit drop or from the Fire Badger Specialist. Speaking of special units, the Typhoon can also only be unlocked from the Specialist or unit drops. They are like a BB Mustang, high damage that is weak against armor and excellent anti-air. However, instead of missile interception, they have a barrier, and their shorter range makes them better when deployed already within range of enemies rather than from a distance. The third special unit is the Farseer, which is a strong general purpose unit but doesn't scale well into a carry unit and is vulnerable to missile intercept. Its strong air attack and cheap EMP makes it an excellent counter for wasps or wraiths. It has some interesting technologies that can support the rest of your board, like photon emission. Lastly, we have the newest addition to the game, the Abyss, a Titan-class unit like the War Factory, which costs $200 of cash in upkeep every round. The Abyss's slow but powerful attack is best at clusters of big or slow-moving enemies, such as other Titans, giants, barriers, or dense clusters of enemies. A melting point and a mixture of air and ground chaff is the best counter to the Abyss. These are all very quick description of units. If you want me to go into more depth on a unit, let me know which one in the comments and subscribe.